Let's just begin on the news that broke this morning to do with Donald Trump's tax returns, reported in the New York Times. Dismissed, I suppose, just with a bit of a fake news comment from Donald Trump. But it talks about him only paying $750 of tax in 2 different years and not paying tax in 10 out of 15 years because he lost, essentially, more money than he made. So they're the deductions. What do you make of this development and what it could mean?
Look, it's certainly been touted, Tom, as a major development, explosive report, they called in the New York Times. I'm not so sure it's as explosive as they say. It's certainly a very interesting one. Donald Trump, of course, unlike any other president, has refused to make his tax records available to the public. He's always said he will, but he never has, and that's always made people suspicious. New York Times has got quite a lot of information going back over a decade of Trump's tax returns. Interestingly, the New York Times has not released the actual documents, which I think is, they say they've got to protect their sources, understandable if that's true, but at the same time it does make it a little bit less of an impact if they haven't actually got the documents there. What they're saying is that there are two gists here, Tom, is that the president lost a lot more money than he admitted and therefore paid a lot less tax than he admitted, and that he avoided tax as much as he reasonably could. Now, it doesn't suggest that he's done anything illegal. And so, yeah, it's an interesting question. How will voters take this? I mean, I presume that most voters will take the assumption, a lot of voters, well, of course Donald Trump would minimise tax. I mean, Kerry Packer famously said, if you pay more tax than you should, you're a fool. Or will people think, well, you know, he's a dodgy character and he's minimised tax and that's a disgrace. I mean, it's going to be really interesting to see exactly how people take this report. Right.
So, yeah, and you mentioned, you know, his appeal with voters as well. Obviously, he's always seen as a good businessman. Is it just good practice to minimise taxes? How does this stack up, though, with what he said before around his tax? Obviously, he's never allowed these tax returns to be released, but what he's said about them?
That's right. I mean, this is where he is in a weak position because Donald Trump has said previously that nothing's wrong with his taxes, but he's not going to release them because he's being audited and that you shouldn't release them when you're being audited. That's actually not the case. He can release them if he chooses to. He's chosen not to. So will people see this as a cover-up or not? I mean, it's a fascinating report. Certainly, it's not a great look. I mean, you know, the president there not paying much tax at all. He's paid a lot less tax, if this report is correct, than Barack Obama or George W. Bush, for example. So, you know, it's very early days. It's only a few hours old, but in the next 48 hours, I think it'll be really interesting to see how this plays out.
Yeah, not to mention less tax than I dare say most blue-collar Americans as well. Let's turn to what the president's had to say about his allegations in regard to possible voter fraud.
They mailed 1,000 ballots out. Unfortunately, they doubled it up, and everybody in this Democrat area got 2 ballots instead of 1. And then 2 days ago, they found 8 ballots in a waste paper basket. Unfortunately, they all had the name Trump written on them. We were going to vote for Trump. They were military ballots, the military. And then they have a stream in a very good state, and they found lots of ballots dumped in the stream.
I mean, it is a strange system, the way some of the mail-outs work, Cam. They're sent in some areas to everybody. Does this mean we're going to get these sort of stories and it's impossible to establish the veracity of a lot of them as well?
I'm not sure you can establish the veracity of any of it, Tom, at all, because, you know, I mean, what Donald Trump, the accusations he's making there are contested by a whole range of people, by like the actually authorities as well. I mean, we just won't really know. I guess the bottom line here, and the big picture, and what's important here, is that Donald Trump is simply, absolutely casting doubt over the veracity of the election, regardless of how it goes. And how will that play out? You know, he did that. Remember, he did this in 2016 as well, although he won.
Yeah.
He was still unhappy with the election count. So, you know, I mean, that didn't go anywhere. Will this go anywhere? I don't know. I've spent 10 hours driving through rural Michigan talking to voters about these sort of issues. And a lot of them are very concerned that on election night and in the weeks that follow, there will be a lot of trouble in America. They're very nervous about the fact that there might not be a clear result one way or the other.
Yeah, and you understand that. I wanted to turn to your piece in The Australian. You talk about Amy Coney Barrett, of course, the nomination for the Supreme Court being pro-life, not just in theory, but in fact, she learned during her pregnancy of their youngest child, and she's got a brood of 7, including adoptions, that the youngest child had Down syndrome. She chose to go through with the birth and now begins each day carrying him down the stairs on her back. So this makes criticism of her pro-life stance somewhat tricky, doesn't it?
Look, I mean, she's, she's very pro-life. She's a devout Catholic, as you say, mother of 7, 5 biological and 2 adopted. And other judges say, look, she lives her beliefs. But she also says, Judge Barrett does say that she doesn't believe that her personal beliefs will impinge on her legal judgments or have impinged on her legal judgments. A lot of judges do say that and they don't follow through, but some actually do. So, we really don't know at this moment. She's only been a senior judge in the US for a couple of years, Tom. And so, she was with the Notre Dame University as a professor of law for a long time. So she's a little bit untested in that respect. So it's interesting to see the Democrats are saying, oh, my God, she's going to cancel Roe versus Wade, et cetera, et cetera. It's just too early to really say. And I think both sides of politics here in America are going to look very, very closely and see what sort of judge she actually turns out to be.
We've got Joe Biden having a different focus on his attack, whether or not she'll help effectively outlaw the Affordable Care Act. Here was Joe Biden.
There's no mystery about what's happening here. President Trump is trying to throw out the Affordable Care Act. He's been trying to do it for the last 4 years. Never before in our nation's history has a Supreme Court justice been nominated and installed while a presidential election is already underway. It defies every precedent.
He went on to say there could be a lot more health issues because of COVID-19, that people will be left without care, which seems like a decent campaign to run on. The problem could be, though, that he's running a campaign on what would happen if this nomination happens. If it's already happened, you're getting people out to vote based on anger about a decision rather than them being able to change it. Is that an inherent issue here?
It is, Tom, and that's a great question as to whether that, she's already appointed. Well, it's done, if you like, and so will that actually make a difference? But people's anger is a motivating factor on both sides of politics here, of course, especially in the US. To go out and vote, it's quite a good tactic by Joe Biden in a way, because the Affordable Health Care Act, Obamacare as it's widely known, is actually a winner for the Democrats in the sense that Trump and the Republicans tried to overthrow it. They failed, but they're also very lukewarm about overthrowing it now, because they've found that with polls, it's actually quite popular, because if it actually got overthrown, 20 million Americans would be thrown off health insurance. And so they're a little bit tepid about doing that. So what Biden is doing here is he's saying, look, a week after the election, the Supreme Court's going to be looking at the legality of Obamacare. They could throw it out entirely. Do you really want that to happen? And so I think it's quite a clever strategy by the Democrats to do this. And it's going to be a difficult one, in a sense, for Trump and the Republicans to repudiate.
Cam Stewart, appreciate you finding time on the road as you test the feelings of Americans out there ahead of this election. Thank you.